Hello everyone, Rob Rousseau here, just reminding you to please smash the subscribe button as well as the bell and the thumbs up, leave a comment, and hey, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe over on Patreon, patreon.com/Rob Rousseau. Okay, that's all. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Hi, Camila.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm very well. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's a huge thrill to have you.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is great. I was thanking our mutual friend Jay Watts for helping set this up. Very, very cool to have you on the show today.
Yeah, he says very good things of you, and he's a very influential person for me here, and as is the rest of the comrades of the Communist Party.
Yeah, great. Yeah, you're in Canada right now, right? What brings you to what brings you to Canada?
I'm on a democracy promotion tour sent by some of the socialist regimes of Latin America, actually. And I just heard that there are some issues with neoliberal authoritarianism here, so I thought I'd make my way and see if I can have a word with a couple people around here. But I have
our democracy is in jeopardy. We need someone to bring democracy to this country. It's horrible. Well, I got to tell you, we cry out for freedom.
Yeah. Absolutely. As it turns out, there are some alternatives being proposed around the world, and they're not just based in Scandinavia or Northern Europe, but based in the global South. And I think there's been a, kind of an absence of information about what that might look like, what's being proposed, and what are the different things that social movements and leftist governments are putting forth and trying to build. And that's something that we try to, put a spotlight on at Kawsachun News, which is our outlet, which is based in Bolivia.
Yes, and it's a really vital resource for anyone that wants to get news from this region that's not being filtered through this kind of like Western imperialist lens, as all our media in our supposed free press is. It's a really vital resource to not have that kind of influence on the news coming out of this area that has kind of a completely unapologetic anti-imperialist stance, which we don't have access to really here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, there's obviously a lot of English language outlets based in the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia, which spotlight Latin America, different elections and different issues that come up, but they don't have on the ground reporting and sometimes have the tendency to parachute into Latin America. We have a permanent presence there. We report ourselves, myself and my colleagues, but we also try to share some of the reporting and, like stuff that people send us from different friends and comrades who are also on the ground when they visit different countries. We think it's a different, type of project that hasn't existed before. We have some, projects that we really admire and we look to for inspiration, which are Venezuela Analysis, Brazil Wire, but they're all based on, very particular countries and issues. And we are based in Bolivia, but are, trying to cover more and more of Latin America and the Caribbean as well.
Yeah, so let's get into this subject. This is something that we've talked about a lot on the stream over the last year. I've been calling it the new pink tide. I was saying earlier, like, I don't want to be presumptuous about this. Sometimes I like to kind of speak things into existence. But there's really something, it seems very special happening in Latin America right now. Your Kawsachun is based in Bolivia. We had, of course, over the last couple of years, Bolivia successfully defending themselves against a kind of pro-Western imperialist coup. We've had Cuba recently kind of rather easily overcoming this sort of destabilization op that we were seeing on November 15th and previously. We have the socialist government in Honduras being restored. We've got Nicaragua just reelected Ortega and the Sandinista government, despite this immense international pressure. Venezuela is standing strong behind the revolution. We've got Castillo in Peru. We've got this Chilean presidential runoff coming up soon between Boric and Kass, which is really like a fight to whether Chile is going to go return to the socialist path or go back down this kind of very dark Pinochet style government, which is, probably very frightening for people there. We've got the Brazilian election coming up soon. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been setbacks or contradictions. I know that there are external and internal reactionary forces that are kind of trying to stall or set back these movements. We're seeing that in Peru, for example. But this is what I want to ask you. That was a long setup, but this is what I want to ask you is that overall, what would you say the feeling is among people in Latin America right now in this kind of historical moment? And like, could you just describe sort of how these socialist movements in these various nations are responding to this moment in history?
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary of the different things that we're looking at that are happening right now. I think for a lot of people on the left and a lot of people who are a part of social movements and leftist parties around the region, it does feel like it's very slow to come. I mean, social movements exist on a permanent level at the grassroots, whether or not there's a leftist government in power. And so, a lot of people spent decades and decades building, organizing, trying to build popular power from the ground up. And it can be very difficult to create a space within electoral politics and to take power, which, as we've seen, can be taken away in an instant. But this is something, kind of what you said is along the lines of what the General Secretary of ALBA, which is the Bolivarian Alliance, said today in a press conference ahead of tomorrow's ALBA Summit. It's the 20th ALBA Summit that will be held on the 17th anniversary of the bloc. And it's a bloc of 9 countries. And they're saying St. Lucia, which was in addition to all of these elections, which you said, kind of make it seem like some sort of pink tide resurgence. We also see St. Lucia coming back to the bloc after an absence of 3 years. We saw last year, Bolivia returned following the coup, and after having restored democracy from the Jean Añez dictatorship, they returned to the bloc. They had left for a period of a year. And, we also saw St. Lucia leave the Lima group when this new government came in. We saw Peru under Castillo leave the Lima cartel as well, which of course you all know was spearheaded by Chrystia Freeland, and that was her little failed project here. And it's just really important to see that these changes are taking place very slowly. And as Sacha Guarenti, the Secretary General of ALBA, said today in this press conference, ALBA is more relevant than ever. And these are some of the projects being proposed. ALBA is one of the most important projects being proposed that is, directly confronting U.S. hegemony in the world. So we have CARICOM, which is a community of Caribbean states. We have ALBA, which is, kind of a bloc that is largely led, designed by Fidel and by Hugo Chavez and led by Cuba and Venezuela still, as well as Nicaragua, with a number of other small Caribbean island states coming together. And then we have CELAC. And CELAC is another organization that brings together 33 states of Latin America and the Caribbean and doesn't include Canada and the US. This is just incredibly important for building ties of mutual cooperation, mutual benefit for the peoples of our countries, and which doesn't have, the US or Canada interfering or unfortunately, the US still maintains influence over some of the member states of CELAC, such as Colombia, but it's an incredible, move forward to be kind of reviving these mechanisms for integration. At the same time, CELAC held a China CELAC forum meeting in which, the 33 states came together with China to talk about the kind of cooperation that we're going to be doing here from the region or in Latin America and China. And this is incredibly important. It means we can build a world which is multilateral without having to go through the United States or other imperialist powers in order to ask for permission for things, in order to develop, and we can see our own way to develop towards development. We know that all this partnership with the United States hasn't led to the development it should have, or that they claim that it would have. They're sending tons and tons of money, just showering money through US different, State Department agencies on different governments in our region. And we still see that those are countries that don't have proper infrastructure, where people don't have an opportunity, where young people continue a mass exodus to the exterior to seek opportunities. An example of that, of course, being Honduras and Colombia, where people for decades have fled seeking a better life. So these partnerships are going to be absolutely key. And I think people are beginning to see that, there are some very encouraging signs in different countries of the region. That win in Peru, that win by Castillo in Peru and Peru Libre was, contradictions intact and everything, was very important because it was a country where people thought was just going to be riddled by neoliberalism forever. And people didn't really acknowledge or recognize the strength of the social movements and the leftist parties there, which do exist as they do in every country. People had given up hope after so many years of lack of democracy in Honduras following the 2009 coup. And a lot of people didn't see, the ways in which those social movements were building back power and trying to form coalitions, some of which, don't include the most revolutionary sectors, to be able to take back popular power at the polls. So we're seeing these processes happening everywhere. They're also happening in El Salvador, in Guatemala, in Colombia, in Brazil, and other countries that I think the North has cast as hopeless. But of course, we know that the most revolutionary sectors are there on the ground through large social movements such as La Via Campesina, the landless workers movement in Brazil, trying to find ways. We're not in an era of armed combat anymore, as we were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. We're now trying to build electoral popular power so that we can take power through the polls.
Yes, and just one thing I have to push back on a little bit. You said it hasn't been great for development, but I have to say it has been very great for the development of stock portfolios of U.S. and Canadian mining conglomerate shareholders and stuff. So I'd please keep these people in your thoughts as well.
Absolutely.
But I also wanted to point out as well, just in the meeting of these different nations and this kind of the solidarity that these different Latin American countries are starting to show one another, it is really presenting such a stark contrast to this like fake U.S.-led democracy summit that we're seeing right now. And it's been seeing these kind of two things happening concurrently has been really interesting, as you have the U.S. and all these formerly colonialist countries kind of getting together and trying to dictate to people in Latin America or to people in Southeast Asia or China about what it means to be a democracy, and you're really seeing their waning influence as they try to kind of make these claims, and it's not really able to be backed up by any actual tangible action in these governments anymore. And it's becoming very clear to everyone, I think, that maybe in a few decades ago that would have been more convincing. We're seeing the results of the so-called incredible free democracy in the United States as the infrastructure is crumbling. Social any possible advances during coronavirus of expanding social benefits or these things are all being slashed away. They're kind of on the verge of this like highly reactionary backlash moment right now. So it's becoming less easy, I feel, for the United States and for Canada to continually lecture nations in the global south about what democracy is, because we're displaying with full view of the whole entire world that these are not such like steadfast values as we kind of proclaim them to be, and it's actually not, indeed, in fact, not very democratic at all. And this is becoming very clear to everyone.
They've preyed on the vulnerabilities of the most vulnerable sectors of these countries of the global south for so long. That's the reason why they're able to come into communities and open sort of like community centers or offer kind of like scholarships for journalists in like Guatemala or countries where they're trying to stage a coup like Bolivia, to learn English, to fly to like ASU campus, I think it is, in Arizona, and take a course on how to be a journalist. They don't even have to know English. I mean, this is just a program that's currently being offered to young people, and they literally say Indigenous and Afro-descendant women of Nicaragua, they're currently offering this program to. I mean, they're literally just preying on the most, vulnerable sectors, because there's no other way to do it but to, hand out cash to people that they know are going to be, they're not going to find a lot of other opportunities, or who would love a chance to, travel to the United States or whatever it be. But like you said, the influence is waning in all other ways. We saw like a number of accounts on social media that I'm not necessarily familiar with were highlighting the ways in which nobody was participating or interacting with this Summit for Democracy that was taking place. The viewership on the YouTube channel was extraordinarily low. They offered it in numerous languages.
I think we're
And
getting
if you
more
look at all
viewers right
those,
now than the Summit for Democracy was getting on YouTube on
is
this
it still
channel.
on? Like,
I don't
didn't
even
even
know.
know
No
it
one
was still
knows.
on. I mean,
Yeah.
I think like outlets have stopped kind of like talking about it. The only thing I've seen is, these rejection letters or statements by different governments of the world who have, outright denounced the existence of this so-called summit. But nobody's interested in it. Nobody's interested in these scams that the State Department continues to produce, in which they're appointing every Black, Indigenous, disabled migrant person to high positions within the Biden administration. I mean, just absolutely nobody buys it. It's absolutely ridiculous that they're trying to they're trying to insult us with those sorts of sensibilities, as if that's something that impresses us, that now women can be drafted into the military or anything like that. It's just they have nowhere to go with it. And at the same time, they're being confronted by a whole slew of new anti-imperialist media and people such as yourself who are streaming, podcasting. And so they just have absolutely nowhere to go with those lies. Meanwhile, our feeds are full of news sources from around the globe that are giving us, the truth now in English. So yeah, like you said, it's just absolutely hilarious to watch, but I don't think it's like a one-time thing. I think this is what it's going to be here forward.
Yeah, I really hope so as well. And I think when you talk about the previous sort of turn to the left in Latin America, this was something that was able to be sort of managed or crushed in many ways by the United States and by the Western governments who have, been just like relentless in interfering in the democracies in these nations for now decades and overthrowing governments that they don't like and waging economic warfare and all this kind of stuff. And that's something that you touched on a few minutes ago that is something that I constantly talk about on this show, which is the emergence of this new multipolar world order that we're seeing right now. And like, if you're a Western leftist, like there's a lot to not be very happy about in our own communities. All our enemies in power, we have little to no influence in any kind of like political movement here. But that's one thing that I keep holding on to and I get very excited by is this emergence of this new sort of multipolar world. And when you relate that to Latin America and this new pink tide, it doesn't seem like it's going to be quite as easy for Western governments to undermine and crush these movements now that there is this sort of like new global superpower emerging in China, which is kind of providing a counterbalance to this endless Western hegemony, right? And we're seeing that specifically in Nicaragua right now, right? We got the Sandinista government getting back in Nicaragua, and they're immediately reestablishing diplomatic ties with China. So that has been a central tenet to this whole movement, right? Just having that ability, that different model for development is allowing these return to the left movements to flourish and are not being so easily undermined and crushed by the West.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important, one of the things we try to do is highlight the type of public works that we're seeing around the region, thanks to these, leftist governments. It's not right-wing neoliberal puppet governments that are providing high quality healthcare or that are innovating at home despite a 60-year blockade. It's Cuba which is doing that. It's Cuba which is sending doctors and other medical professionals all around the world and teaching, cooperating and skill sharing with different health authorities of countries of Africa and Asia and the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean, and how to deal with pandemics and other health issues where they are. At the same time, we're seeing, the highest level of quality free education in Nicaragua, and countries absolutely begging for that sort of cooperation with different countries. And the vaccine or the vaccines that were produced in Cuba were just a huge, source of pride for the entire region. And that's something that's only been, possible under socialism. We don't see any of the other countries. Not only did they not have the means to produce their own vaccine, but they weren't receiving that sort of a help from their supposed allies. So that sort of corporate cooperation has been absolutely key. We have China and Russia partnering with different countries in the fields of medicine, and we also kind of have these, super influential states that are not large economies, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, that are also propping up smaller countries and helping them find their way in difficult times. I think that was a very key moment, in the last, year and a half during COVID, that, it was just the United States had a massive, and I guess Canada as well, had a massive opportunity to help its supposed allies and was completely absent.
Yeah. And can we talk a little bit about specifically this relationship that is developing between Nicaragua and China right now, and the possibility of a new a canal project in Nicaragua that had been kind of abandoned for a few years being restarted? Is that, it seems like there's movement toward this at the moment in Nicaragua. Do you think that's a possibility for something in the immediate future that might start to be developed? And can you talk about what that such a project would have in terms of undermining America's ability to wage economic warfare in Latin America and to control these, with these trade routes with the iron fist that they've been doing for the last many decades?
Yeah, it sounds like that project is still very much alive. That's what President Commander Daniel Ortega told us at an event on Friday. It was a sort of like a military officer or police officer graduation ceremony that took place, just hours after the announcement of the resumption of diplomatic relations between China and Nicaragua. He said that despite that for this number of years, officially Nicaragua has maintained those supposed relations with Taiwan, they still maintained relations with the Communist Party of China and with businessmen from China as well, and the private sector who were developing some projects in Nicaragua. So kind of below the surface, they were continuing to do that. And he said that those projects are still alive, and he mentioned the canal. So I don't think he would, with all the chatter going around, I don't think he would have mentioned that unless that was still on the agenda. And like you said, there's a port in Cuba, and I know that, this is not a project that is just for the benefit of 5 million people or whatever the population of Nicaragua is. It would be to benefit the entire region and all of the sanctioned countries under the unilateral coercive measures of the US and its allies, to be able to get, vital necessities into these countries. These countries are now producing more than ever and have turned a focus into, internal national production to be able to provide for their own people. And they can also, be doing more and more trade among states, and, among other states that continue to hold relations with Nicaragua and the rest of Latin America, and have denounced these coercive measures by the US. So, a lot of countries of the world would actually benefit from this. The countries of Europe want to continue to trade and work with the countries of Latin America. And so, I think that's going to be huge. Sorry, I can't remember what else you were mentioning there.
No, that was great. This is one thing that I did want to ask you about as well, though, which is that I was wondering, what your advice would be for, Western leftists who want to support these movements and support the move back towards socialism in Latin America. One, it's been an endless source of frustration for me, is seeing a lot of Western leftists, some with prominent platforms, many of whom stream right here on Twitch regularly, who seem unwilling or unable to just unapologetically support these movements, whether it's in Bolivia or Cuba or whatever. Infamously, when the coup was going on in Bolivia 2 years ago or whatever it was now, it was so obvious if you understand the history of American imperialism or Western imperialism in Latin America, what was happening. And it should have been very easy, I thought, to just denounce that. But you have many Western leftists that I feel are just unafraid to, they're kind of afraid to unapologetically denounce these things. You have a lot of fence sitters. Famously, a friend of the stream, just Canadian journalist Justin Ling, was going online saying, "Oh, it's not a coup. It's not a coup, folks." Of course, we've got to highlight all these undemocratic actions on the part of the Bolivian government. And you have this is really pervasive in Western leftist discourse here. It's very frustrating. I imagine it's frustrating for you as well. A few weeks ago, we saw the same thing in Cuba as these protests were going on, and then instead of just like immediately denouncing it and recognizing it for what was going on, you had a number of people saying like, "Well, hold on now. Let's not start talking about the CIA and Cuba and the blockade and sanctions. We have to make sure we uplift these dissenting voices." There's always this predilection to try and appear above it all when it comes to these moments, and just not unapologetically support these movements in Latin America. Like, what is your reaction to that, and what would you suggest Western leftists should do if they care about the global South and getting out from under the boot of imperialism of Canada and the United States and these former colonialist countries?
Yeah, I mean, we really can't speak to celebrity streamers as to what they're going to say. I don't think that that they have any sort of accountability among, countries that they know nothing about and, should never be regarded as any sort of authority on. But I mean, even we at Kawsachun News and like any of my colleagues who, I work alongside at any of the outlets that I work with, I mean, we're subject to, I think, reporting on what's going on in Latin America and what the truth is without, our own judgment. That's to say that, we're not like more, what is it? Like, we don't have more moral authority over anything that's going on.
Yeah.
Where we live in Bolivia, there's a lot of people who ask us, in conversations, like friends and comrades from the global North, who ask us, why countries like Bolivia or others have certain policies towards women's rights and abortions, why they don't have more progressive policies on something or what they consider to be the correct policies. I mean, it's not really for us to decide, is it? I mean, first of all, some of us, myself, I'm not Bolivian, I just live there. I support people's right to universal free access to healthcare, and that includes or should include the right to, a free, safe abortion created or provided by the health authorities in the state, where women feel like they can access that and a number of other services. But it's not for me to impose, and it's not for me to say. And if we speak to the communities of these countries, in the example of Bolivia, the social movements and the unions and the women who head the social movements and the unions, it's very important that we listen to what they, if they think that that's the priority right now, if this is something they're pushing. And I can tell you that in a country like Bolivia, there are grassroots women leaders who are pushing for this sort of change from the bottom. And within the government, including in the highest tiers of government, there are women and people who consider themselves identify as feminists who are also pushing for these sorts of policy changes. But it's something that needs to be done organically, internally, from the people there, not from agencies and people dropping in and imposing on Bolivian women and the Bolivian government and its policies. That goes, the same for issues of environment and in every other country as well. If someone thinks that a certain policy or an infrastructural project is going to be environmentally disastrous, quite frankly, they're not looking at, the ways in which imperialism is the greatest threat to our world and the environment itself. And that's, of course, led by the United States and the corporations that are housed, here in Canada, the extractivist, mining corporations, as you've said. So unfortunately, what these people say here, be they academics or streamers or supposed anti-extractivist activists, has absolutely no bearing on what goes on in those countries. And it is very important that, that we don't see ourselves as some sort of platform for the purest politics, the most ideological sound politics, because we do this or that. That we listen to what the people are saying of these different countries, whether or not they want a certain government supporting their popular will, making sure that they're able to hold elections, upholding their right to hold free and fair elections without intervention, without imposing candidates from beyond without, having tons of money just funneled into the country. This is something that, again, they're going to be addressing tomorrow at the ALBA TCP summit, where they say that they're going to be talking about the creation of a observatory to monitor the types of money that's being funneled into the country, who is going to the opposition, the sectors of the different oppositions in these countries, and for what purposes, where it's coming from, and they're going to be reporting on it. Surely this is something that's actually going to get approved there at the ALBA meeting. And it's incredibly important that, so in all sorts of ways, we're imposing on Latin America instead of listening to what the people are saying, listening to, what they're trying to do in order to liberate their country so that it's free, sovereign, and independent territory as Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela and Bolivia are.
Yes. And another thing I wanted to ask you about, Camila, is I was wondering, because this is another thing we've been talking about recently on the channel, the willingness of these big tech companies to discern like who counts as a valid news source and who doesn't, and like the willingness of these big tech companies to work with the U.S. State Department and follow this U.S. State Department line and ensure that viewpoints that are supportive of these like official enemy governments, like in Venezuela or Nicaragua, are suppressed as much as possible, while sort of ignoring these very obvious like botnet campaigns, like we saw with the SOS Cuba thing, which was very clearly like a sort of hostile attack, like a sort of propaganda attack, pushing this kind of line. Is that something that you've dealt with? Because I know you've had success with Kawsachun News and getting this message out there using social media, but has that been a struggle as well to overcome this limitation that these tech companies are setting in terms of who is allowed to support these Latin American movements and who's not allowed to?
It's a huge problem for us. Every day we're struggling to figure out how to navigate this because we're new. So it's not like they're taking down our page of 100,000 followers or subscribers or whatever it is, because we're literally just now, launching our Instagram, launching on these different platforms. So we're also looking for ones that we can actually get into, that we're not going to have our pages pulled down and censored, as we've seen happen to so many of the outlets that we work with and are friends with. I've worked with Mint Press News. They've been censored time and time again on Facebook, perhaps other platforms as well. I'm a correspondent with Press TV, which is an Iran state media. They've also been just censored to it's been the most, extensive censoring of any outlet that I know of in English. That's absolutely just not allowed to stream or run or exist on YouTube, on Facebook, etc. And so I know this is happening all the time. And so it makes it very difficult when we, are trying to figure out where we can get our information at. We're only a year old, and, it's really great to see people sharing our stuff, but some of the ways that we're thinking about sharing our stuff is maybe just being like sending little videos and memes and things through chats, like through Telegram and WhatsApp, because, building a big audience online on these different platforms can be gone in a second. And also, a lot of the people with the means to build a very successful, easy to use, nice interface sort of platform online might not, have the same sort of interest in us and could be subject to censorship as well. So this has been very difficult. I mean, we're constantly asking for help. I don't actually know anything about Twitch, who owns it, who runs it, and how it works. But, I've been going to different outlets actually since I've been here, because a lot of times in Latin America, we don't even, there's like layers of problems. We don't have good internet. We are based in a rural area. And so we've been kind of, trying to figure out where to, what basket to put all our eggs in. And so I've been kind of speaking with some of the streaming platforms and meeting with people here, since I have a stable internet connection and everything like that, trying to figure out who wants to house Kawsachun News, how we can proceed. We think that the sort of information and on the ground reporting that we have to offer is so important. And I don't think, getting wiped off a platform like Twitter is going to end us. I'm currently, censored on one of my Twitter accounts. Is why I have another one, because it's like no one sees my old account. Basically, is like a shadow banned, is it? But like this is something that's a huge problem. We've seen that a lot of the kind of hashtag campaigns, like you said, around Cuba. Not only did they do that whole bot account thing where they had people create like thousands of accounts or whatever that were tweeting like hundreds of times a second. Like the State Department, just in plain sight, will actually launch a hashtag or sayings that if you go and search through Twitter, they are the only account to have started it, or the only account to be using that. I mean, they're just doing it in plain sight. So it is something that we're constantly struggling with, because we don't have access to major platforms. We're not on television. We don't own satellites. We don't own radio stations. We're constantly trying to find a place to exist. And on top of that, we're being further censored on social media, but we're working on it.
Yeah, well, you are more than welcome to come on here anytime. It's a huge thrill for me to be able to provide a platform to these kind of viewpoints. And I guess that's the kind of the funny thing about this conversation, though, is that when you have like Westerners who really fetishize this idea of Western liberal democracy, and again, love to lecture people in Latin America or Southeast Asia or China or wherever else about what is democracy, what is authoritarianism, and so on. The main thing that they often latch onto is this idea of free speech and the free press. And when you just dig into any of this stuff beyond this like vague surface level understanding, you realize that these things don't actually exist in our society. And you have these big tech companies working alongside, just openly working alongside the United States State Department to suppress certain viewpoints and elevate others. And many of these people that fetishize this idea of free press and free exchange of ideas actually support this. It's this weird doublethink that people have, I think, in the West, where they simultaneously use this as a cudgel, basically, to lecture countries in the global South about how enlightened our democracy is, while simultaneously supporting the open suppression of viewpoints that they disagree with. As long as it's on the left. When it's on the right, then it's okay actually to elevate these viewpoints, and that's more of an example of our enlightened ideas about the free exchange of ideas and this kind of thing. But it's very strange to see this doublethink play out in real time.
Yeah, I will say that I was really pleased to see that. I think in 2017, maybe again in 2018 and 2019, there were some protests here in Toronto downtown, outside of the CBC, just for this blatant. I don't know if your audience is mostly in Canada, but just for its blatant misinformation campaign on Venezuela at a time when Venezuela was under total propaganda siege by the mainstream media. And we would never expect anything better from the the big private media, the corporate owned media, which is controlled by literally like U.S. pharmaceutical companies and stuff like that in the U.S. But in the case
the defense
of Canada,
industry,
we have to at least in Canada, you would think that maybe there would be some sort of standard for the type of coverage and the blatant lies that they'll have on there. I mean, this includes all of the so-called analysts and commentators that they have on television. So it was really good to see a little bit of pushback. These aren't like massive demonstrations outside the CBC headquarters, but it just shows that there is like a little bit more awareness that, what we're getting from the major newspapers here and from the television has just been total trash, and that people have to look elsewhere, hopefully not to Justin Ling or Lin, whatever that guy's name is.
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's not important. Yeah, definitely. If you do look into who owns Twitch, you'll actually find that it's actually Jeff Bezos. But don't worry, I have actually spoken to Jeff off stream, and he's informed me that he actually agrees with all these beliefs, and he's on board with all this stuff. So don't worry about it.
Okay.
But again, it's a huge thrill for me to be able to provide a platform to these viewpoints that I think is really absent in our media establishment, our media culture. Thank you so much for joining the show today to talk about this stuff. I hope we covered everything that is important to talk about in terms of this move back to the left in Latin America right now. Thank you so much, Camila, for joining us. Is there anything, do you want to plug anything else one last time? Talk about Kawsachun, or just let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter or where other social networks?
Kawsachun News is on Twitter, on Instagram. We have a TikTok, on Facebook. We have a YouTube and a Patreon where you can support our on the ground reporting. We are an outlet that is based in the rural area of Bolivia, 6 hours from the city of Santa Cruz, about 4 to 6 hours, depending on mudslides and other natural occurrences from Cochabamba. So we're very, very far away from any city. We really are embedded in the social movements there, specifically the Cocalero movement, which is the traditional indigenous coca growing sector. So it's all indigenous campesinos. They grow the coca leaf, which is highly consumed in Bolivia. And so we are housed there. We have our offices at a community radio station, but we don't really have a lot of funding in order to travel around and do our on the ground reporting. So that's really essential. So the best way to support our work is on Patreon or by sharing our stuff. Kawsachun News. I'm sure you can find us on Twitter.
Yes, and everyone in the chats was really enjoyed this conversation. They're telling me to say thank you. Everyone liked it a lot. We just had a number of other people joining us as well, so I hope you pick up maybe a few more followers from it. But I just want to thank you again. It was really a pleasure to talk to you about this stuff. And again, you're welcome back anytime if you want to come on the stream and chat about any of this stuff.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that your show and your streaming even exists. Like, I don't know a whole lot about the media landscape in Canada, and I think this is how this even came up in the first place.
It's pretty grim, I'll tell you that much.
With Jay, it's pretty what?
It's pretty grim. It's not good. Yeah.
Well, I literally I was asking for a name or names of all of the different journalists or media personalities and outlets, just trying to figure out, what the scene is here. Actually, because I was actually trying to see if we could form some sort of a delegation or organize something to take people to a certain Latin American country to learn more, but a media delegation. And so I was really interested in hearing, and I heard very good things about you.
Well,
so thank you so much for having me.
Sign me up if you need me down there as well. I'd be more than happy. But thanks again, Camila. It was great to talk to you. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.